The first time I caught her sneaking through my yard, she froze like a deer in headlight, shovel in hand. 1 foot already on the edge of the flower bed I just spent 2 weekends perfecting. She had the nerve to wave and say, "Oh, don't mind me. Just checking the soil." I'm Isaac Kerns, a 42-year-old electrician who owns the last corner lot in a quiet neighborhood tucked outside of Dayton. I bought the place 5 years ago with the goal of some peace and maybe a grill in the backyard. What I didn't know was that peace had a price, and her name was Charlene. Charlene Witherspoon. Middle-aged, bob haircut, sunglasses always on top of her head, clipboard always in hand. She was the president of the Evergreen Trails HOA, and she ruled our cul-de-sac like it was her personal kingdom. No porch furniture unless it matched neighborhood aesthetic. No yard signs unless pre-approved. And apparently, no boundaries. Especially mine. That first time, I let her walk off with a tight smile and a fake excuse. But then it happened again. And again. Turns out, Charlene had decided that my backyard was the most efficient pedestrian route from her house to the HOA mailbox kiosk. Instead of walking the sidewalk like everyone else, she began cutting straight across my lawn, down the slope, and out the side gate I never lock. Not only that, but she started bringing others with her. Her friends. Her yappy little dog. Once, I even saw her dragging a cart of flyers. I confronted her 3 times. The first time, she pretended she didn't understand property lines. The second time, she told me my grass wasn't doing anything important. The third time, she handed me a yellow slip from the HOA claiming I had an unmaintained side yard pathway that was unsafe for community foot traffic. That's when I realized this wasn't just about walking. She was trying to annex my yard. I wasn't the kind of guy to lose my temper easily, but I knew when I was being played. I started documenting. Every time she crossed my yard, I took a photo. I installed a motion-activated camera hidden inside a fake rock near the side gate. I even logged timestamps. Within a week, I'd collected 27 incidents. I figured I'd bring it to the next HOA meeting and call her out in front of everyone. But Charlene beat me to it. A week before the HOA meeting, I got a notice on my door. Unapproved landscaping violation, formal hearing required. It claimed I had unauthorized topographical alterations and unregistered construction materials. I had no idea what that even meant. I showed up at the HOA clubhouse furious. The board sat behind their long folding table like a tribunal, with Charlene front and center. She didn't even wait for me to sit down. "Isaac," she said, flipping through papers, "we've received multiple complaints about your yard becoming an unsightly hazard. People are tripping on the uneven slope. And there's concern you may be storing building materials illegally." I stared at her. "You're kidding, right? You're the one trespassing." She didn't blink. "This isn't about me. This is about Evergreen Trails. About safety. About community standards." The board nodded like trained parrots. That's when I realized she wasn't just being nosy, she was laying groundwork for something bigger. And the next part of her plan unfolded 2 days later. I came home from work and found a woman in pink gardening gloves digging a shallow trench right through my side yard, right beneath the camera. Charlene stood nearby, supervising like some twisted foreman. I parked, got out of my truck, and yelled, "What the hell are you doing?" Charlene turned like I was the one interrupting her. "We're installing a community walkway. It was approved in a special session." "You should have attended." I stormed over. "That's my private property." She smiled politely. "Not according to the revised plat map." I stared at her. "What plat map?" She pulled out a folded sheet from her clipboard and held it up. The HOA submitted a petition to reclassify the border easement as communal access. It passed. I took the paper. It was a copy, not even notarized. And the signatures? Half were fake. 2 were from residents who had moved years ago. "You forged this," I said, my voice flat. "The board signed off," she shrugged. "And it's already in motion. You can't stop progress just because you're emotionally attached to some grass." I didn't say a word. I just turned around and walked back to my truck. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up rereading property deeds, city maps, and zoning rules. I called a friend who worked at the county recorder's office. The easement Charlene claimed? It was on the city utility line, not for pedestrian use. And it was still part of my lot. So the next morning, I made a plan. I went to the hardware store and bought 10 bags of quick dry concrete, a wheelbarrow, a shovel, and a tarp. I waited until noon, when I knew Charlene would return with her little crew to continue digging. When I saw her pink gloves over the hedges, I rolled the wheelbarrow out and started mixing the concrete right there in the yard. She looked up, confused. "What are you doing?" she asked. I didn't answer. I just started pouring. Slosh. Right into the trench they dug. Thick, wet, heavy concrete filled the cut through my lawn, covering their work inch by inch. Charlene stepped forward, hands on hips. "You can't do that. That's HOA property now." I looked at her, dead serious. "Then why are you standing on my grass?" She backed off, but not before shouting, "This is vandalism. You'll be fined." "Call the cops," I said, spreading the last of the concrete. "Let's see what they think." She didn't. Instead, she stormed off in a huff, dragging her little garden trowel behind her like a kid who didn't get her way. By the next morning, the concrete had hardened. Clean, smooth, impossible to dig through without a jackhammer. I even smoothed it out and stamped private property into it with a rubber alphabet set I found in my garage. Then I printed out every photo, every log entry, every video clip, and a copy of the real plat map. I stapled them into a folder and mailed them to the city code enforcement office, the county recorder, and just for good measure the local news tip line. Charlene didn't know it yet, but her shortcut had just turned into a dead end. By the time Monday rolled around, the concrete trench had become the most talked about thing in Evergreen Trails. I didn't need to post anything online. It traveled through word of mouth faster than wildfire. People slowed their cars when passing my house. A few even pulled over to take photos. I didn't acknowledge them, just kept trimming the hedges like nothing had happened, letting my silence say everything. Charlene, on the other hand, didn't take it quietly. At 7 in the morning, a knock rattled my front door. I opened it to find a man in a cheap beige windbreaker holding a clipboard. He introduced himself as a community compliance advisor, which sounded like something Charlene made up 5 minutes before printing his badge. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Kerns, we've been informed that you've poured non-permitted concrete on shared access land and—" I held up a folder before he could finish. "This is the official plat map from the Montgomery County Recorder's Office. That land isn't shared. It's mine. And unless Charlene has forged legal documents again, I'd suggest you check with the city before stepping further." He faltered. Again, I raised an eyebrow. "You didn't hear that from me." He took the folder, flipped through it, and quietly stepped off the porch. That was the last I saw of him. But Charlene wasn't done. Not even close. Later that afternoon, I got a call from my neighbor, Dolores. She lived 2 doors down and spent most of her time crocheting on her porch, a true sweetheart. Her voice trembled over the line. "Isaac, I just thought you should know. Charlene came by earlier asking folks to sign something. She said it was about reclaiming community pathways, but it sounded fishy. I didn't sign." I thanked her, hung up, and walked to my garage. If Charlene was trying to cook up another bogus petition, I wasn't going to wait for it to explode in my face. I opened my storage cabinet, pulled out the portable printer I used for work invoices, and started compiling everything I had into a presentation. Not just photos this time, timestamps, video stills, a copy of the city's easement guidelines, and a notarized copy of my property deed. I even printed an email from city planning confirming that no pedestrian access routes were approved through my lot. Then I filed a formal complaint with the county zoning board. But I didn't stop there. That same evening, I visited the home of Janice Young, a retired attorney who had lived in Evergreen Trails longer than anyone. She wasn't one for drama, but when I showed her what Charlene had done, especially the forged map, she went from sipping her tea to pulling out a yellow legal pad. "You realize this is fraud," she said, pen tapping against her knee. "If she submitted this to any government office under the pretense of official action, that's a felony. And if she's using HOA funds to push this stunt—" She didn't finish the sentence, just started writing. Janice didn't waste time. Within 24 hours, she had drafted a formal letter requesting an audit of the HOA's finances. She submitted it directly to the HOA treasurer, a nervous guy named Todd who once accidentally sent out a dues notice in Comic Sans. When he read the letter, he turned pale and promised to look into things. Meanwhile, Charlene doubled down. Wednesday morning, I woke to find a bright orange sign staked into my front yard. "Notice of non-compliance subject to fine." It had the HOA logo, but the paper was laminated like it had been prepared in advance. There was no explanation, no citation, just that vague threat. I didn't remove it. Instead, I marched it down to the city's code enforcement office. I asked to speak with Director Minetti, the same official who'd emailed me earlier. He met me in the hallway, glanced at the sign, and grunted. She posted this herself, he asked. Right in my yard, I said. He took the sign and walked off without another word. Back in Evergreen Trails, things started to shift. Residents who had always kept their heads down began asking questions. First quietly, then louder. I got nods from people who'd never spoken to me before. A couple even stopped by to thank me for standing up to the madness. But Charlene wasn't blinking. On Friday, she called an emergency HOA session. Flyers were shoved into mailboxes, stuck under doormats, even taped to trash bins. The language was dramatic: urgent developments, property misuse, threat to community harmony. I showed up early and took a seat near the back. The clubhouse was packed. Every folding chair was taken, and neighbors lined the back wall. Charlene stood at the front with her usual clipboard, flanked by two board members who looked like they regretted being there. She cleared her throat. Thank you for coming. As many of you know, there's been an unfortunate situation involving one homeowner's obstruction of a planned community pathway. We've attempted to resolve this peacefully, but due to continued resistance, we must decide on sanctions. Murmurs rippled through the room. I stood up. Before you sanction anyone, maybe the community should see this. I walked toward the front, holding a stack of folders, one for each board member, one for Charlene, and one for the crowd. I handed them out, then stepped aside as people started flipping through. Silence fell. The forged signatures, the fake map, the email from the city, the video stills of Charlene supervising unauthorized digging. It all hit at once. A man in the front row spoke first. That's my name. I never signed this. Another woman pointed at a photo. That's my kid's birthday. I remember because you walked through his party to cut across the yard. Charlene's smile faded. This is being taken out of context. Janice Young stepped forward, holding her own folder. It's not. I've submitted a formal request to audit the HOA's finances. We'll see exactly what was spent on this so-called pathway. Charlene's voice rose. This is a witch hunt. He poured concrete on common land. No, said Director Minetti, who had quietly stepped in through the back door. He poured concrete on his private property, and you posted a fraudulent notice in his yard. That's why I'm here. People turned to look at him. He held up a manila envelope. We've opened an investigation into multiple violations, including misuse of HOA authority, falsified documents, and unauthorized construction. We'll be interviewing board members starting Monday. If you've been asked to sign anything recently, we advise you not to. Charlene went rigid. Her fingers tightened around her clipboard. Someone near the back clapped. Then another. Then the room erupted. She tried to regain control. We're not finished here. Todd, the treasurer, stood. Actually, yes we are. I've seen the bank statements. There are charges for landscaping services we never approved. Equipment rentals. Even a brunch tab labeled Board Strategy Lunch that cost nearly $400. That was the final blow. Charlene's voice cracked. You're all turning against me? After everything I've done for this neighborhood? Janice didn't raise her voice. This isn't about loyalty. It's about the law. Charlene left the room without another word. By Sunday, an emergency vote was held to suspend her HOA presidency pending the investigation. Over 90% of the neighborhood voted in favor. Todd resigned too, though Janice convinced him to stay on temporarily until a special election could be held. As for me, I spent Sunday afternoon in my backyard grilling a rack of ribs, the scent wafting across the clean concrete that now bore a small plaque reading, "No trespassing by order of property law." No one cut through it again. Charlene didn't show her face for nearly 2 weeks after the emergency vote, and honestly, no one missed her. The neighborhood felt like it had exhaled for the first time in years. Kids biked more freely, yards bloomed with previously unapproved garden gnomes, and porch furniture suddenly diversified beyond beige. My concrete slab, now more monument than obstacle, stood untouched, its new bronze sign gleaming in the afternoon sun. But peace, like always, didn't last. One Thursday afternoon, I returned from a job rewiring an old farmhouse on the outskirts of town. I pulled into my driveway and found a plain white sedan parked partially across it. The driver's door opened, and a sharp-faced woman in a black blazer stepped out, holding a leather portfolio. "Mr. Kerns?" she asked. I nodded, cautious. She extended a card. "Detective Mallory Grant. Montgomery County Financial Crimes Unit. Mind if I ask you a few questions? I led her to the porch, offering a seat across from me. The last time someone from the county came knocking, it had unraveled half of Charlene's schemes. This time, though, the tone was colder. We received a report involving forged municipal documents, misappropriation of community funds, and unauthorized land development, she began. You were listed as the complainant attached to several of these files. I leaned forward. That's right. I provided the documentation 2 weeks ago. Everything I had: photos, videos, signatures, even a notarized deed. She nodded. That's why we're taking it seriously. But there's more. She opened her portfolio and laid out a copy of a check. It was made out to a landscaping company in Cincinnati, not local, for nearly $12,000. The memo line read, Community Path Project, Phase 1. Was this check signed by Charlene? I asked. Her, and one other board member, Douglas Reed. I hadn't heard that name before. He's not on the board anymore. He resigned and left town last week, Grant said. No forwarding address. His bank accounts were emptied 2 days before he disappeared. I sat back. The backyard trench had been the tip of something uglier. Charlene hadn't just bent the rules she'd stolen from the entire neighborhood. What about the funds? I asked. So far, we've traced over $30,000 in HOA expenses that can't be accounted for. Equipment rentals, contractor payments, even catering services for non-existent events. All signed off by either Charlene or Reed. My stomach turned. And you're saying they pocketed that money? We believe so. Reed's signature appears on every one of the checks. Charlene's on all the invoices. But here's where it gets worse. She pulled out a map, an aerial photo of evergreen trails with several properties highlighted in red. Mine was one of them. We found a pattern, she said. Charlene submitted requests to the county zoning office to reclassify narrow easement strips along the edge of multiple properties. The language was vague, community thoroughfare improvement, but it allowed her to apply for small grants through a beautification fund meant for public spaces. Each application included altered plat maps, along with forged resident support. I stared at the page. So she was trying to turn private lawns into public walkways, just to collect grant money? Grant nodded. Each grant was worth between $5,000 and $10,000. She applied for 6. 3 were approved. That explained her obsession with my yard. It wasn't about convenience. It was about cash. She's under investigation now? I asked. She's been subpoenaed. But here's the problem: we believe she's destroyed or hidden most of the physical records. The HOA's financial data was only accessible through her personal laptop. The treasurer claims he never had full access. I stood up. I might be able to help. I led Grant to my garage and opened a locked cabinet. Inside was a hard drive I'd used to back up the footage from the side yard camera. But I'd also recorded the HOA meeting, the one where Charlene tried to sanction me in front of everyone. More importantly, I had audio from the earlier confrontation when she claimed the easement had been reclassified with a forged map. Grant accepted the drive. This could be enough to push for a warrant. That night, I received 3 texts from neighbors. All said the same thing. Charlene had been seen loading boxes into her Lexus earlier that evening. By morning, her house was dark and the mailbox stuffed. She was gone. But the story didn't end there. The county prosecutor's office issued a public notice the following Monday. Charlene Witherspoon was wanted for questioning in relation to fraud, document forgery, unlawful land development, and grant theft. Her photo appeared on the local news twice that week. It wasn't glamorous, unflattering lighting, windblown hair, and that telltale clipboard tucked awkwardly under one arm. Within days, the HOA board was dissolved by a unanimous vote initiated by Janice Young. A temporary steering committee was formed, and Janice was appointed chair. Her first action? A full forensic audit of the HOA's finances. I didn't think I'd ever see the inside of the clubhouse again, but Janice asked me to attend the first open community forum. I went out of respect. The room looked different this time, less tense, more curious. People brought questions, not complaints. There were no clipboards, no rigid agendas. At the front, Janice stood beside a whiteboard with a list of goals. Transparency, accountability, community. Those were her first 3 words. She turned to me mid-meeting. Isaac, would you mind sharing what you've learned through all this? I wasn't much for speeches, but I stood anyway. I'm not a lawyer, I said. I'm not a politician. I just wanted to keep my yard private. But when people in power start bending rules, they don't stop until someone calls them out. Charlene wanted more than a shortcut, she wanted control. And she got away with it because no one thought to question her. Someone near the back raised a hand. What happens if she comes back? Janice didn't hesitate. Then we let the law finish what it started. That weekend, Detective Grant returned with an update. Charlene had been located in a rental cabin upstate under her sister's name. When police arrived, she tried to claim she was on a retreat. They found her laptop, 3 burner phones, and a manila envelope full of blank HOA letterhead. She was arrested on charges of fraud, tampering with public records, and theft by deception. Bail was denied due to risk of flight. The news broke the next day. And Evergreen Trails? It didn't flinch. In the weeks that followed, residents turned out to volunteer for cleanup days, neighborhood dinners, and even a mural project near the playground. People who'd never spoken started chatting across driveways. Someone built a miniature library near the mailbox kiosk, the same one Charlene used to cut through my yard to reach. It was stocked with gardening books, DIY manuals, and a copy of the Ohio Homeowners' Rights Act. I finally reseeded the patch of yard where the trench had been, but I left the concrete slab intact. Not as a warning, more like a reminder. A reminder that fences didn't always need to be picket. Sometimes they could be solid, gray, and set in stone. The frost came early that year, settling into Evergreen Trails like a quiet warning. By the time the last of Charlene's flower beds wilted without her to trim them, the neighborhood had already begun its transformation. The HOA was gone, the clubhouse stood stripped of its banners and branded signs, and the old bulletin board once littered with passive-aggressive notices now held only a flyer for a chili cook-off and a child's crayon drawing of a very round cat. I hadn't seen Charlene since her arrest, but her name still floated around in low tones. Especially after the grand jury returned 5 felony indictments: fraud, forgery, criminal impersonation, theft, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. The local paper didn't hold back. Her mugshot ran above the fold, and the headline pulled no punches. HOA Queenpin faces years behind bars. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt finished. Until I got a call from Detective Grant one bitter Tuesday morning. "I need to ask you something," she said without preamble. "Were you ever approached by a man named Jacob Reinhardt?" I leaned on the kitchen counter, staring out at the backyard where the grass had grown over the edges of the concrete slab. "Never heard of him. He's a contractor listed on 2 of the false invoices Charlene submitted. The thing is, he's real. And he's missing." I stood up straighter. "Missing. Last seen 3 weeks ago. His wife filed a report. His truck was found abandoned outside of Dayton. He's still in it." A silence stretched between us. "I thought this was just a fraud case," I said. "That's what we thought too. Until we pulled Charlene's financials. There are payments to a shell company under Reinhardt's name, but the bank accounts were closed a day after she was arrested. We believe she was laundering money through him." I turned away from the window. "You think she had something to do with his disappearance?" Grant didn't answer right away. "We're not ruling anything out." By the following week, the county sheriff's department had secured a warrant to search Charlene's property. Janice called me the morning they arrived. "They brought dogs," she said quietly, "and ground-penetrating radar." I drove by that afternoon. The house that once hosted garden brunches and unwelcome compliance tours was now tinted in caution tape. A forensic team combed through the backyard, unearthing something near the fence line. I didn't want to know what. But as it turned out, it wasn't a body. It was a buried lockbox filled with documents, ledgers, signed receipts, even a flash drive labeled Archive. The police didn't release details, but word spread fast. Charlene had kept a paper trail. Because of course she had. Control freaks didn't trust cloud storage. The flash drive was the final nail. On it were encrypted files showing transfers to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The account had been opened under a false identity, Margaret K. Temple, but the photo ID showed Charlene in a blonde wig and heavy makeup. The image made local news again, and this time, the headline was worse. HOA scandal grows. Fugitive funds, false IDs, and a missing man. Grant called me again 2 days later. "She's not acting alone," she said. "We know Reed's involved, but there's a third party listed in 2 of the shell companies. We've traced them to a real estate holding firm in Cincinnati." I frowned. What does a real estate firm want with a suburban HOA? That's what we're figuring out. But this might go further than Evergreen Trails. 3 days later, a news van parked outside the old clubhouse. A reporter in a peacoat did her segment standing next to the newly painted community mural. Behind her, someone had written in chalk, "No queens, just neighbors." I watched from my porch as the camera panned across the street. The reporter spoke about the growing investigation, the missing contractor, and the possibility that Charlene's HOA had been used as a testbed for larger property acquisition schemes. Apparently, other neighborhoods nearby had reported similar forged plat maps. It was never about walking paths. Charlene had been trying to turn private land into leverage, then sell it. The trial began in January. Janice and I both testified. So did Todd, who admitted under oath that Charlene had pressured him to sign blank checks and told him it was best not to ask questions. The prosecutor introduced email chains where Charlene instructed Reed to expedite easement revisions and handle the pushback quietly. But the flash drive was the centerpiece. The jury saw the fake ID. They saw the wire transfers. They saw a spreadsheet labeled targets with addresses, names, and notes like husband works nights vulnerable line, in front yard too small, back access ideal. My name was on it. So was Dolores. So was the Reinhardt property. Charlene's defense tried to argue that the documents were fakes, planted by someone trying to ruin her. But it collapsed when her laptop's metadata matched the flash drive exactly. File creation dates, login timestamps, even the same misspelled folder name, development plans. After 8 days, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict. Guilty on all 5 counts. She was sentenced to 12 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 8. Reed, still missing, was charged in absentia. A federal warrant was issued for his arrest, and his face joined hers on the U.S. Marshal's wanted list. As for the missing contractor, Jacob Reinhardt, they found him alive. He'd gone into hiding after realizing he'd been used as a fall guy. His name had been forged on dozens of documents, and Charlene had threatened him when he tried to back out. He came forward after seeing the news coverage, and his testimony helped seal the case. Evergreen Trails, once held hostage by rules written in fine print, was finally, truly free. In the spring, Janice stepped down from the steering committee, saying she'd done what she came to do. The neighborhood held a thank-you barbecue in her honor right in front of the clubhouse. No one asked for permits. I brought ribs again. Same rub as before. This time, though, the scent mingled with laughter and music from a Bluetooth speaker someone had hung from a tree. A kid ran past me holding a frisbee, nearly tripping over the edge of the concrete slab. He turned and grinned. "Cool brick thing. What's it for?" I shrugged. "Just a little reminder." He nodded like he understood, then sprinted off. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and cast long shadows across the yards, Dolores handed me a folded piece of paper. It was a petition, this time a real one. They wanted to turn the old HOA clubhouse into a community workshop and to a library. "We figured it's time it served everyone," she said, her hands still stained with dye from her crochet yarn. I signed it without hesitation, and as I walked home through the soft grass and quiet laughter, I passed by the edge of my lawn where the shortcut used to be. The grass had grown thick, and even now, the concrete slab looked almost decorative. No one used it anymore. Not because they couldn't, but because they didn't need to. The fences in Evergreen Trails weren't made of wood or stone anymore. They were built from shared meals, borrowed tools, and the kind of understanding that comes from weathering something ugly together. And for the first time since I moved in, I didn't keep my side gate locked.